1952. 5 hitmen put a bullet in Bumpy Johnson's dog. The next morning, 5 corpses in trash bags, teeth pulled, fingers gone. No witnesses talked, no cops investigated. In Harlem, you don't just kill a man's dog and walk away breathing. The sanitation crew hit the Brooklyn Industrial Waste Facility at 6:47 a.m., same as every Wednesday. By 6:52, 2 men were puking their guts out in the alley, and the shift supervisor was dialing a number he had sworn never to touch. 5 contractor bags, industrial grade, double sealed, lined up against the east wall like corpses waiting for roll call. Tommy Knuckles Reese sliced the first bag open with a box cutter. The stench hit him before the visual did. Not the rot of death, not the sweet decay of a body left too long. Just meat, cold, chemically sanitized, butchered like livestock, inside a torso. Headless, handless, footless. Bled out so thoroughly the interior of the bag looked like it had been scrubbed by a surgeon with OCD. The second bag, same nightmare. Third, fourth, fifth. 5 human beings reduced to parts, each cut surgical, each dismemberment professional. Whoever did this did not just know how to kill. They knew how to erase someone and chose not to finish the job. No blood spray, no defensive wounds, no brass casings, no tools left behind. The scene was pristine, sterile, wrong. This was not disposal. This was exhibition. Knuckles had 17 years in Brooklyn waste management. He had seen everything. Mob executions where the victim's face was caved in with a tire iron. Gang shootings where kids bled out on playgrounds. Domestic murders where husbands carved up wives in bathtubs. But this was different. This was art. Violent, calculated, methodical art designed to send one message. We can make you disappear piece by piece, and nobody will ever find all of you. By 8 a.m., word hit Harlem like a gunshot. 5 bodies, 5 bags, 5 men breathing yesterday. Cataloged meat today. The NYPD opened files, snapped photos that would rot in evidence boxes, interviewed witnesses who suddenly remembered nothing, and stamped the whole thing inactive within 72 hours. No arrests, no suspects, no conclusions. Detective Frank Costello, no relation, 23-year veteran, scribbled his final report. Physical evidence indicates professional execution and systematic dismemberment. No viable leads, no established motive. Case remains open pending new evidence. What he did not write, all 5 victims had Harlem connections. What he did not write, all 5 were known contract killers. What he did not write, one had been seen casing a brownstone on Edgecombe Avenue 24 hours before his body became grocery store cuts. Some truths do not need documentation. They just need street translation. In New York, no charges filed does not mean no blood spilled. It means someone settled accounts in a language the courts do not speak, but every criminal in the 5 boroughs understands fluently. The bags went to the morgue. The story went to Harlem. And in Harlem, stories do not just spread, they become gospel. 5 men walked into the wrong house. 5 men got butchered like hogs. 5 men became a warning that would echo for decades. Nobody talks, nobody testifies, nobody forgets. 48 hours earlier, Harlem at dawn looked like a beast waking up. Metal gates screeched open. Milk trucks rattled down cracked streets. Kids in oversized jackets sprinted toward Peak S. 139 laces dragging. Voices cutting through frozen air. And through it all, Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson, walked. Not casual, not hurried. Walked with purpose. The kind of stride that made grown men check their watches. Corner boys pocket their dice. And entire blocks fall silent for 3 seconds too long. He did not need bodyguards. Did not need iron on his hip. Did not need to bark orders or throw weight around. Bumpy Johnson was the weight. 6'2", 53 years old, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than 3 months' rent for most Harlem families. But he wore it like work clothes. No flash, no jewelry. Just the uniform of a man who had built an empire on broken bones and kept promises, and had zero interest in explaining himself to anyone breathing. Behind him, matching his pace exactly, a Belgian Malinois named Duke, 80 pounds of controlled violence, trained to kill on command, trained to sit in silence, trained to read threats faster than most men could draw weapons. The dog was not a pet. Duke was a weapon with a pulse. When Duke walked easy, Harlem breathed easy. When Duke's ears flattened and his shoulders tensed, smart men found urgent business 3 blocks away. Bumpy stopped at 145th and Street. Nicholas, the newspaper vendor, old man Marcus, been working that corner since Prohibition, handed him the Amsterdam News without a word. Bumpy slipped him a 5, waved off change, kept moving, 2 blocks down. A young hustler named Jerome was running an illegal dice game outside a shuttered bodega. The second Bumpy's shadow crossed the concrete. Jerome killed the game mid-roll, straightened his spine, gave a respectful nod. Bumpy nodded back. Kept walking. No speeches. No warnings. No need to flex or threaten. The walk was the warning. The nod was the contract. Everyone understood the terms. At 409 Edgecombe Avenue, Bumpy stopped. His building. His fortress. 5 stories of red brick and fire escapes. Identical to 1,000 other Harlem brownstones, except for one detail: this building had gravity. The kind that bends everything around it. Duke sat without command. Bumpy scanned the street. Not paranoid. Professional. A man does not survive 23 years in organized crime by being sloppy. Satisfied, he climbed the steps, unlocked the heavy oak door, stepped inside. Duke followed, claws clicking on hardwood like a countdown. The door shut. The block exhaled. No police report called this a patrol. No official document tracked his route. But every shopkeeper, every dealer, every cab driver and corrupt cop in 6 blocks could have drawn you a detailed map of Bumpy Johnson's morning routine, accurate to the minute. That was not surveillance. That was order. That was the invisible architecture of power. And in Harlem, order mattered more than money, more than loyalty, more than blood. Power that lasts does not scream. It does not need billboards or press releases. It just walks the same route every morning at the same time, and the entire world adjusts itself like gravity around a black hole. By 7:15 a.m., Bumpy was inside. By 7:16, Duke was fed. By 7:20, Bumpy sat in his study with black coffee and financial ledgers, doing what he did every single morning, making sure every dollar was accounted for, every debt logged, every promise tracked. Empires do not run themselves. They run because one man refuses to let them collapse. And for 23 years. That had been enough, until someone decided it was not. At 2:47 p.m., Bumpy left the brownstone, business in the Bronx. Legitimate real estate deal requiring his signature, not his time. 45 minutes tops. Duke stayed behind. Standard protocol. The dog did not travel to business meetings. Too conspicuous. Too many questions from people who did not need answers. Bumpy locked the front door. Tested it twice. Walked to the black Cadillac where Ortiz, his silent Cuban driver, sat behind the wheel with the engine already purring. The Cadillac pulled away at 2:51 p.m. At 2:53 p.m., the basement window, a narrow casement that had not opened in 6 years, clicked open from outside. Not smashed, not pried. Opened. Someone had a key or the skills to make one. No squeaking hinges, no scraping metal. Whoever breached that window had rehearsed this, had studied the building, had waited for precisely this window of opportunity. The alley behind 409 Edgecombe was a dead zone. Trash cans, broken concrete, a brick wall blocking sightlines from 3 directions. You could have executed someone back there at noon and nobody would have noticed. 5 men entered. Fast, silent, professional. Not street thugs, not amateurs looking for a quick score. These were specialists. Contractors paid to deliver messages written in blood and terror. They ignored the safe in the study, ignored the cash in the kitchen, ignored the jewelry upstairs. This was not a robbery. This was an execution with a specific target. Duke heard them before he saw them. The Malinois was in the kitchen, water bowl half full, when footsteps echoed down the basement stairs. Wrong rhythm, wrong weight, wrong scent. He did not bark, did not growl. Attack dogs trained for silence moved like ghosts, but 5 men with suppressed .22 pistols moved faster. The first round punched through Duke's ribs. The second shattered his shoulder. The third, fourth, fifth insurance shots. Professional overkill, making absolutely certain the target stopped breathing. Duke collapsed. Hard. Blood spreading across white linoleum like spilled paint. His breathing hitched once, twice, then stopped at 3:04 p.m. The shooters did not celebrate, did not linger, did not take souvenirs. They holstered weapons, exited through the same basement window, pulled it shut, and evaporated into Harlem like they had never existed. Gone by 3:07 p.m. Bumpy's Cadillac returned at 3:42 p.m. He knew before his hand touched the door handle. The street was wrong. Too quiet. Mrs. Calloway from 411, always on her stoop with her granddaughter at this hour, was gone. Even the pigeons had abandoned the block. Bumpy unlocked the door, stepped inside. Silence, the kind that screams. No claws on wood, no tail wagging, no breathing except his own. He walked through the living room, through the hallway, into the kitchen, and stopped. Duke lay in a pool of blood already congealing at the edges. 5 entry wounds, tight grouping, execution placement, the kind of shooting that required training, practice, and 0 hesitation. Bumpy did not kneel, did not touch the body, did not make a sound. He stood there, hands in pockets, reading the scene like a book written in violence. Blood spatter, bullet angles, no forced entry except the basement window that required inside knowledge to access. The message was crystal clear. We penetrated your fortress. We killed what you love, and you were powerless to stop us. Except they were wrong about that last part. Bumpy walked to the telephone in his study and made 4 calls, each under 30 seconds. No names, no explanations, just locations and one deadline. Before midnight. He hung up, poured 2 fingers of bourbon, sat in the leather chair by the window, and watched Harlem continue its routine while daylight bled from the sky like a cut throat. Somewhere out there, 5 men were celebrating, toasting their success, counting their money, convinced they had just humiliated the king of Harlem and walked away. Clean. They were wrong. In 23 years, Bumpy Johnson had mastered one lesson above all others. Real power is not what you do when the world is watching. Real power is what you do when your enemies think they have won. Some messages do not need words. They need timing. They need precision. They need the kind of violence so thorough and so public that it becomes a myth people tell their children as a warning. And in Harlem, Bumpy Johnson was about to write a myth that would last 50 years. By sunrise, 5 men would learn what it costs to kill a king's dog. By sunrise, 5 families would be planning funerals. By sunrise, Every criminal in New York would understand one simple truth: there are lines you do not cross. And Bumpy Johnson's home is the brightest, reddest line ever drawn. Bumpy didn't call the police, didn't call a doctor, didn't touch the body. He stood in that kitchen for 17 minutes, motionless, studying the scene like a general reading a battlefield map. Blood spatter, bullet trajectory, entry points. The angle of Duke's final collapse. Most men would have raged, would have kicked furniture, punched walls, screamed for revenge. Bumpy Johnson had learned a long time ago that rage was expensive. Rage made you sloppy. Rage made you predictable. And predictable men ended up in trash bags in Brooklyn. He crouched down, not to mourn, but to analyze. 5 shots. Professional spacing. Suppressed rounds. Probably .22 caliber. No casings left behind. Clean exit through the basement window. No forced entry anywhere else. This wasn't a hit. Hits were about elimination. This was surgery. Calculated. Personal. They could have killed him. Could have rigged the whole house to blow. Could have waited in the study with shotguns and turned him into hamburger the second he walked through the door. But they didn't. They killed his dog. In his home. While he was away. And left everything else untouched. That required planning. Required surveillance. Required knowing his schedule down to the minute when he left. How long he'd be gone. Which windows had broken locks. Which neighbors minded their own business. This wasn't about power. It was about humiliation. We were inside your kingdom. We touched what you love. And you couldn't stop us. Bumpy stood up slowly, joints creaking. 53 years old. 23 years in the life. He'd buried friends, rivals, partners. He'd attended 17 funerals where he was the reason the casket was closed. He'd watched empires rise and collapse. Watched men betray everything they believed in for a suitcase full of cash or a bullet to avoid. But this was different. Duke wasn't leverage, wasn't a business asset, wasn't a symbol or a statement. Duke was the thing that made coming home feel like coming home instead of just returning to a fortress. And someone had studied him long enough to know that, had watched him close enough to understand what mattered, had decided that the best way to hurt Bumpy Johnson wasn't to kill him, it was to kill the one thing that didn't care about his reputation. Smart play. Vicious play. The kind of play that required a response that would be remembered for decades. Bumpy walked to the sink, washed his hands, dried them on a dish towel that still had Duke's paw prints from this morning. He folded the towel carefully, set it on the counter, and made his way to the study. 4 phone calls, each one brief, each one specific. I need eyes on the Italians. Anyone who's been too quiet this week. Check the docs. Somebody moved equipment recently. Suppressed firearms. Small caliber. Find out who's been asking questions about my schedule. Last 2 weeks. Every conversation. Get me a list of everyone who knew I was leaving this afternoon. Every name. I don't care how small. No threats. No promises of violence. Just data collection. Just connecting dots. Because here's what most people didn't understand about revenge. It's not about anger, it's about mathematics. You don't lash out, you calculate. You identify the weak point in your enemy's armor, the thing they think is safe, the thing they didn't protect because they didn't think it mattered. Then you remove it, slowly, methodically, so completely that they spend the rest of their short lives understanding exactly what they took from you. By 6 p.m., Bumpy had 3 names. By 7 p.m., he had 5. By 8 p.m., he knew exactly who'd pulled the trigger, who'd funded the operation, and who'd been dumb enough to think this would end with a dead dog and no consequences. He sat in his leather chair, bourbon untouched, watching night swallow Harlem. Somewhere out there, 5 men were drinking, celebrating, telling the story of how they'd walked into Bumpy Johnson's home and walked back out without a scratch. Let them celebrate. In 23 years, Bumpy had learned that the best revenge isn't fast. It's thorough. It's the kind that makes people stop telling stories about you and start whispering warnings. Some men wanted to be feared. Bumpy just wanted to be understood. And by tomorrow morning, the lesson would be clear. You don't kill a man's dog. You don't walk into his home. You don't humiliate him in his own kingdom and expect the sun to rise the same way. Because if power is real, it doesn't forgive, it recalibrates, and it leaves a mark so deep that nobody ever makes that mistake again. No official conclusions appear in any police report. These are inferences drawn from gaps in the record, from what wasn't said, what wasn't filed, what disappeared before it could be documented. If you want someone to hurt, you don't touch their empire. You touch their memory. The first name Bumpy got wasn't a shooter. It was a driver. Mickey Brennan. Low-level Irish muscle out of Hell's Kitchen, 26 years old. 3 priors for armed robbery. No known affiliation with any of the 5 families. A nobody. A ghost. The kind of guy who drove getaway cars and kept his mouth shut for $200 and a promise. Bumpy had him brought to a warehouse in the Bronx at 11 p.m. Not dragged, not beaten, just invited. Politely. The way you invite someone to a conversation they can't refuse. Mickey sat in a folding chair under a single hanging bulb. Hands free. No rope. No restraints. 2 men stood in the shadows behind him, silent. Patient. Waiting for orders that might never come. Bumpy walked in at 11:14 p.m., pulled up a chair, sat down across from Mickey like they were old friends catching up over coffee. "You drove a car today," Bumpy said. Not a question. A fact. Mickey's jaw tightened. "I drive cars every day. I'm a driver." "You drove 5 men to Edgecombe Avenue, waited in the alley, picked them up at 3:07 p.m., dropped them at a warehouse in Red Hook. You got paid $300. Cash." Mickey didn't answer. Didn't deny it. Just stared at the floor. Bumpy leaned back. "I'm not here to hurt you, Mickey. I'm here because I need to understand something." Mickey looked up, confused, scared, but listening. "You've been driving for the Italians for 2 years," Bumpy continued. "Small jobs, clean work. You're good at what you do. Professional. I respect that." Silence. "So help me understand," Bumpy said, voice calm, almost gentle. "Why would a smart kid like you take a job inside my home?" Mickey swallowed. "I didn't know it was your home." "Bullshit. I swear to God." "You knew," Bumpy said, still calm. "Everybody knows where I live. It's not a secret. So let me ask again why." Mickey's hands started shaking. They said you wouldn't do anything. They said you were getting old, losing your grip, said Harlem was changing and you were just holding on. There it was, the crack in the armor. Not betrayal for money, not revenge for some past slight. Just assumption, the arrogance of youth. The belief that power had an expiration date and Bumpy Johnson's had already passed. Bumpy didn't react, didn't raise his voice, didn't move. "Who told you that?" he asked. Mickey hesitated. Then, quietly, "Paulie Tornino, out of the Genovese crew. He's been saying it for months, said you were soft, said you cared more about that dog than about business. Said it was time somebody showed you that the old rules don't apply anymore. Paulie Tornino, mid-level enforcer, ambitious, hungry. The kind of guy who thought respect was something you took instead of something you earned." Bumpy nodded slowly. And you believed him? Mickey trailed off. Yeah, I believed him. Silence stretched out, long enough that Mickey started sweating. Then Bumpy stood up, straightened his jacket, looked down at the kid in the chair. You made a mistake, Mickey. But it wasn't driving the car. Your mistake was thinking that because I don't shout, I don't act, that because I walk quiet, I walk soft. He turned toward the door, paused. Go home, Bumpy said. Tell Paulie Tornino that I'm not mad. Tell him I understand his ambition. Tell him I appreciate his initiative. Mickey blinked. That's it. That's it. Bumpy walked out. The two men in the shadows didn't move, didn't speak, just watched Mickey stumble out of the warehouse and disappear into the Bronx night. 3 blocks away, in the Cadillac. Ortiz glanced at Bumpy in the rearview mirror. We letting him go. For now, Bumpy said. He's gonna deliver a message for me, and by the time Paulie hears it, he's gonna realize his mistake. What mistake? Bumpy lit a cigarette, exhaled smoke, watched the city lights blur past. He thought I wouldn't notice one small lie in a sea of loyalty. Thought I was too busy, too distracted, too old to care about details. He tapped ash out the window. Every empire falls the same way. Ortiz. Not because of enemies, because someone on the inside decides they're not important enough to be watched. The car turned onto the highway. Paulie Tornino's name would never appear in a police file, would never be mentioned in court. History wouldn't record what he said or who he said it to. But by morning, Paulie would understand that some lies cost more than others, and some men keep track. History doesn't record the names of people who talk too much. It just records the silence that followed. Every empire collapses from a single detail. The only question is whether you notice it in time. The network moved at 2 a.m. Not because Bumpy gave orders he didn't need to. He just made phone calls. Quiet. Brief. The kind that didn't need explanations because everyone already understood the language. First call Marcus, the newspaper vendor at 145th and Street, Nicholas. You still got that cousin who drives for Yellow Cab? Yeah. I need to know everyone who got picked up within 3 blocks of Edgecombe between 2:30 and 3:30 p.m. yesterday. Destinations, descriptions, everything. Give me 2 hours. Click. Second call. Delroy, who ran the corner bar on Lenox Avenue. Anybody been celebrating recently, spending more than usual buying rounds they couldn't afford last week? I'll ask around. Before sunrise. Delroy. Before sunrise. Click. Third call. Officer Monroe. Harlem beat cop for 11 years. On Bumpy's payroll for 9. I need a favor. Name it. Check recent gun permits, suppressors, small caliber. Anything processed through Red Hook or Hell's Kitchen in the last month. Don't file paperwork. Just names. That's risky, Bumpy. So is forgetting who pays your daughter's tuition. Silence. Then, I'll have it by 6 a.m. Click. Fourth call. Vincent Calabria. Owns 3 warehouses in Brooklyn. No official connection to organized crime. But everyone knew the score. Vin, you rented space to anyone new this week. Couple guys from the Genovese crew. Needed it for storage. Paid triple rate for privacy. They still there. Left yesterday evening. Cleaned the place out. Barely left a fingerprint. You get names, fake ones, but I got a license plate. Text it to Ortiz. Done. Click. No shouting. No threats. No dramatic declarations. Just simple transactions. Information for leverage. Silence for security. Everyone doing exactly what they were supposed to do because that's how the machine worked. By 4 a.m., the pieces were assembled. 5 shooters professionals from out of state, hired through a Genovese intermediary, paid $1,500 each. No connection to Bumpy, no prior beef, just contractors doing a job. One driver, Mickey Brennan, already questioned, already rattled. One middleman, Paulie Tornino, who'd orchestrated the whole thing thinking Bumpy was too washed up to retaliate. And one critical detail, the warehouse where they'd stashed the weapons, still rented for another week, paid in advance, probably planning to let it go cold before cleaning it out. Big mistake. Bumpy sat in his study, the ledger of names spread across his desk like a battle map. Not angry, not vindictive, just methodical. He didn't need to pull triggers himself. He just needed to set the table. The rest would handle itself. Fifth call Dominic, the butcher, Russo. Old school enforcer, semi-retired. Living in Queens on a pension and a reputation. Dom. Bumpy. Long time. I need a cleanup crew. 5 contracts. Professional work. No noise. No mess. Just gone. That's expensive. I'm paying double your rate, plus expenses. Pause. What's the timeline? Before sunset. Another pause. Longer this time. You want them disappeared or you want them found? Found. Bumpy said. I want the message clear. That's gonna cost extra. I'm aware. All right. Send me the details. Click. 6th call. Ortiz. Pick me up at 5 a.m. We're going to Brooklyn. The warehouse. The warehouse. By 5:47 a.m. Bumpy was standing in the Red Hook facility where the shooters had regrouped after the job. Empty now. Sterile. Nothing left but tire marks and the faint smell of gun oil. He didn't touch anything. Didn't leave evidence. Just stood there, hands in pockets, looking at the space where 5 men had celebrated what they thought was a victory. Then he left. By 7 a.m. The network had done its job. 5 names, 5 addresses, 5 men who thought they'd gotten away clean. No orders were given. No contracts were signed. No money changed hands in any traceable way. But everyone understood. Taxi drivers knew which routes to avoid. Bartenders knew which conversations to forget. Cops knew which reports to file slowly. And by sunset, 5 men who'd walked into Bumpy Johnson's home would learn that some debts don't get paid in cash. They get paid in silence. No orders, no invoices, no paper trail, just phone calls, just favors, just the invisible architecture of power, doing what it does best, moving pieces without showing the hand. Real power doesn't command. It sets the price of silence, and everybody pays. By 6 p.m. Thursday, the first body turned up. Not in Brooklyn, in Harlem. Right on the corner of 125th and Lenox, propped against a lamppost like he'd sat down drunk and forgot to wake up. Anthony Trigger Vaccaro, 32 years old, contract killer out of Newark. Specialization suppressed firearms, close range work. No witnesses, except now he was the witness, to his own execution. 2 bullets, back of the head. Professional, the same way he'd done Duke. No wallet, no ID. But everyone knew who he was. Word traveled faster than the coroner's van. The NYPD arrived at 6:14 p.m., took photographs, cordoned off the block, interviewed exactly 0 witnesses because nobody saw a goddamn thing. By 7 p.m., the second body was found. Chelsea, outside a diner on 8th Avenue. Frankie Knuckles DeLuca, the muscle, the enforcer, the guy who'd kicked in the basement window. Same execution style. 2 rounds, back of the head, left in public like a monument. The third body, Greenwich Village, slumped in an alley behind a jazz club. Ricky Fontaine, the wheelman's backup. Young, stupid. Thought this job would make his reputation. It did, just not the way he planned. Fourth body, Red Hook, the warehouse district, found inside the same facility where they'd regrouped after the hit. Tommy Ice Moretti, the planner, the tactician, the guy who'd mapped out Bumpy's schedule, identified the weak points, sold the job to Paulie Tornino as a low risk, high reward play. He'd been wrong about the risk. Fifth body, Hell's Kitchen, outside Paulie Tornino's favorite bar. Paulie himself, 38 years old. Genevieve's crew, ambitious, ruthless. The guy who'd convinced 5 professionals that Bumpy Johnson was past his prime. Found with his hands zip-tied behind his back, a single .22 round in the base of his skull, and a playing card tucked into his jacket pocket. The ace of spades. Old school, dramatic, unmistakable. The NYPD opened 5 separate investigations, assigned detectives, conducted interviews, filed reports that went exactly nowhere because nobody wanted to talk. And the people who did want to talk didn't know anything worth saying. By Friday morning, every newspaper in New York was running the story. 5 men found dead in coordinated execution. The Post called it gang violence. The Times called it organized crime. The Daily News didn't call it anything, just printed the names and let people draw their own conclusions. But in Harlem, nobody needed a newspaper. They already knew. 5 men had walked into Bumpy Johnson's home. 5 men had killed his dog. 5 men had thought they'd gotten away with it. And now 5 men were dead. Not hidden, not buried in unmarked graves. Displayed. Publicly. Like trophies. Like lessons. The message wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. This is what happens when you cross a line. This is what happens when you think respect is optional. This is what happens when you mistake patience for weakness. By Friday afternoon, the Genevieve's family released a statement through their lawyer. We condemn this senseless violence and have no knowledge of any ongoing disputes. Translation: we're not backing Paulie's play. He acted alone. This isn't our problem. By Friday evening, every crew in New York, Italian, Irish, Black, Puerto Rican got the same memo. Bumpy Johnson is not retired. Bumpy Johnson is not soft. And Bumpy Johnson's home is not a place you go uninvited. No trial, no testimony, no arrests. Just 5 bodies and a city that suddenly remembered how power worked. At 7 p.m. Friday, Bumpy sat in his study. Same leather chair, same bourbon, same view of Harlem settling in tonight. The phone rang once. He didn't answer it. Rang again. He let it. On the 3rd ring, he picked up. It's done, Dominic said. Clean. As requested. Good. Click. Bumpy hung up. Poured another drink. Looked out the window at the streets he'd walked for 23 years. Somewhere out there, people were whispering, recalculating, adjusting their understanding of where the lines were and what happened when you crossed them. That was fine. Let them whisper. Let them recalculate. Because power isn't about making noise. It's about making examples. And examples, when done right, last longer than monuments. The dog was still dead. That pain didn't go away. But the people who caused it, they were gone. Erased. Turned into cautionary tales that would be told in every back room. Every bar. Every corner in New York for the next 20 years. And that, in the end, was the only justice that mattered in a world where the law looked the other way. And the only contract that held weight was the one written in blood. Bumpy set down his glass, turned off the lamp, walked upstairs to bed. Tomorrow, Harlem would wake up different, quieter, more careful, and Bumpy Johnson would take his morning walk. Same route, same rhythm, except this time without Duke at his side. Some losses you carry forever, some debts you collect in full. No legal conclusions confirm a direct connection between the deaths and any individual. The NYPD files remain officially unsolved. These are merely observations of coincidence, 5 men disappearing within 48 hours of a crime that was never prosecuted. When the law goes silent, a different order speaks, and everyone listens. There was no war. That was what shocked everyone. 5 mutilated corpses in 48 hours. 5 families planning funerals. 5 names erased from the criminal underworld like they never existed. And then nothing. No retaliation. No Genovese soldiers rolling through Harlem with automatic weapons and blood in their eyes. No counterstrikes. No vendetta. Just silence. The kind that follows an explosion so violent everyone goes deaf. The math was simple. 5 professional killers sent a message. 5 professional killers got butchered and displayed like trophies. Anyone stupid enough to escalate would end up the same way. Carved into pieces and left where the whole city could see. Risk versus reward. The equation did not balance. By Monday, a meeting happened. Unofficial. Undocumented. 3 men in a back room at Rouse in East Harlem. Neutral territory. No weapons allowed. No witnesses except ghosts of 100 deals made and broken in that same room. Representing the Genovese family, Carmine Accardo. Underboss, 56 years old. A man who understood that empires lasted because you knew when to fight and when to swallow your pride and move on. Representing Bumpy Johnson. Nobody. Bumpy sent no representative, no lawyer, no intermediary. His absence was louder than any speech. Carmine sat alone at a corner table, espresso going cold, waiting like a defendant before sentencing. At 8:47 p.m., the phone behind the bar rang. The owner answered, listened without speaking, nodded once, and carried the receiver to Carmine's table on a silver tray like he was serving poison. Carmine picked up. "Yeah." Bumpy's voice came through calm. No anger, no threat. Just facts delivered like a coroner reading cause of death. "This is courtesy. Your boy Paulie made a catastrophic error in judgment. I corrected it. Permanently. We are done." Carmine exhaled slow, carefully. 5 bodies is a hell of a correction. 5 men invaded my home, executed my dog. Thought I was too old, too soft, too washed up to respond with proportional violence. They miscalculated, fatally. I do not hold you personally responsible for their stupidity, Carmine, but I need absolute clarity on one point. I am listening. Harlem is not negotiable. My home is sacred ground. Anyone, and I mean anyone, regardless of family affiliation or perceived status, who crosses that line will be dismembered and displayed as a public example. No exceptions, no warnings, no second chances. Long silence. Then, message received. Crystal clear. Good. Inform your people no vendetta, no grudges, no lingering resentment. But the boundary is permanent. Cross it and the outcome does not change. Ever. Click. Carmine hung up, finished his cold espresso, left $300 on the table for a $5 drink and walked out into the night. By Tuesday morning, every crew in the 5 families had the update. Not a threat, not a challenge, just a geographical adjustment to the power map of New York City. Bumpy Johnson was untouchable. His territory was forbidden. His home was a kill zone that you did not even look at without written permission and a death wish. No treaty was signed, no lawyers drafted terms, no handshakes, no photographs, just understanding. The kind that comes when everyone agrees some fights cost more than any possible victory, and some men are not worth testing even once. Peace did not come from morality or diplomacy or mutual respect. It came from mathematics. Cold, brutal, Irrefutable mathematics. 5 men dead. 0 tactical advantage gained. Infinite risk to anyone dumb enough to try again. The equation was so lopsided a child could solve it. The Genovese family absorbed the loss, wrote it off as the cost of poor decision-making by a rogue element, tightened internal discipline, made absolutely certain everyone understood Paulie Tornino acted without authorization, got himself killed, and dragged 4 contractors into the grave with him. Case closed. By Wednesday, Harlem was back to normal operations. Shops opened. Kids went to school. Numbers rackets ran smooth as clockwork. Bumpy resumed his morning walks. Same route, same rhythm. Except now people watched closer, nodded deeper, gave wider berth. No parades, no victory celebrations. Just a city recalibrating to new reality. The peace held. Not because anyone wanted it, because everyone needed it, because the alternative was mass casualties and 0 profit. And in a world where power was the only currency that truly mattered, survival always trumped pride. Some agreements do not need paper. They just need 5 corpses and a phone call. No treaty was ever signed. No written record exists in any archive. Just a brief conversation that prevented a war before the first shot could be fired. Peace always has a price. The invoice just does not get printed. Every year, same corner, same time. No exceptions. 7:00 a.m., corner of 145th and Edgecombe, the exact spot where Bumpy used to pause during his morning walk, where Duke would sit without command, where the world held its breath for a moment before continuing. The first year after Duke was executed, people noticed Bumpy standing there alone, hands buried in coat pockets, staring at concrete where his dog used to wait. He did not speak, did not move, did not acknowledge anyone, just stood for 8 minutes exactly, then walked away without a word. No explanation, no memorial plaque, no flowers or candles or framed photographs. Just a man and a patch of sidewalk and a silence so heavy it felt like gravity doubled. The second year, people knew to expect it. Shopkeepers did not raise their gates during those 8 minutes. Taxi drivers rerouted. Even kids running late to school instinctively walked quieter, understanding something sacred was happening even though nobody explained what. Bumpy stood. Same spot, same posture. Same 8 minutes of absolute stillness, then walked away. By the 5th year, it had crystallized into ritual. Unofficial, unspoken, but observed like scripture. At 6:58 a.m., the corner cleared, not because anyone ordered it, just because that was the protocol. You gave the man his space. You respected the moment. You did not ask questions. At 7:00 a.m. sharp, Bumpy arrived, stood, stared at pavement where Duke used to sit and watch the world with eyes that missed nothing. No tears, no visible emotion. Just presence, memory made physical. At 7:08 a.m., he left, and Harlem exhaled and resumed normal operations. Nobody asked why 8 minutes. Nobody photographed it. No journalist wrote about it. No documentary crew tried to film it. 'Cause some rituals are not meant to be explained or archived or analyzed. They are meant to be felt in your bones and respected in silence. The neighborhood understood. Old-timers who watched Bumpy build his empire from ash and ambition. Young hustlers who heard the stories. Mothers walking kids to school who taught the lesson without words. When Mr. Johnson is on that corner, you stay quiet, you show respect, you do not interrupt grief. 8 minutes was not mourning. It was acknowledgement. That power requires sacrifice. That empires are built on losses invisible to outsiders. That the price of being untouchable is sometimes losing the one thing that made you feel human. Duke had been a dog. Just 80 pounds of muscle and loyalty and unconditional devotion. But in those 8 minutes every year, Duke became something larger, a reminder, a monument, a line drawn in blood that said, "This is what I lost. This is what they took. This is why the rules exist and why breaking them carries fatal consequences." By the 10th year, kids who never knew the original story still knew to be silent during those 8 minutes. It had passed into neighborhood folklore, into the unwritten code of Harlem survival. You do not cross Bumpy Johnson. You do not touch what he loves. And every October morning at 7 a.m., you remember exactly why. No cameras ever captured it. No newspapers reported it. No official record documented the annual ritual. But everyone who lived in Harlem between 1952 and 1968 knew. They had witnessed it. They had participated by crossing to the other side of the street and moving slower and teaching their children without explanation. 8 minutes of complete silence in a city that never stopped screaming. 8 minutes where the most powerful man in Harlem stood on a corner and remembered what it felt like to have something love him without agenda or fear or calculation. And when those 8 minutes ended, he walked away. Same route, same rhythm, same kingdom, just emptier than before. Harder than before, colder than before. No press photographs exist of this moment. No official documentation records the ritual. Just collective memory of a neighborhood that understood some losses cannot be replaced, only honored in silence until you die. There are things you never recover, wounds that never close. You just learn to carry the weight until it becomes part of your skeleton. The NYPD investigation into 5 murders remained officially unsolved, permanently. Case numbers 52-447-1 through 52-4475. 5 separate files. 5 corpses. 5 families demanding justice. 0 arrests. 0 leads. 0 convictions. Detective Frank Costello, no relation, filed his final summary in November 1952. The language was clinical, bureaucratic, deliberately vague. Despite extensive investigation spanning 6 weeks, no viable suspects have been identified. No witnesses provided usable testimony. Physical evidence suggests highly professional execution methodology, but motive and perpetrator identity remain undetermined. Recommend case status, inactive pending new evidence. Translation: we know exactly what happened. We know who ordered it. We know why it happened. We know 5 men got butchered like livestock as payback for killing a dog. We are just not writing any of that down. Ever. Because some cases are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be understood. And understanding does not require conviction, or trial, or testimony. Just a lesson clear enough that nobody needs it repeated. The files went into storage boxes. The boxes went into a warehouse basement. And storage, in police terminology, meant the same thing as erasure. By 1953, nobody publicly discussed it anymore. Newspapers moved on to fresh scandals. Families moved on to new businesses. Even cops moved on to murders that actually mattered to their careers. But Harlem never forgot. The story evolved from news to legend to law. Do not disrespect Bumpy Johnson. Do not invade his home. Do not test whether age has made him soft. No judge handed down those verdicts. No jury deliberated those rules. But every hustler, every dealer, every ambitious young killer with a gun and a dream absorbed them the same way you learn fire burns. By watching what happened to people who touched it. 5 men entered Bumpy's home. 5 men got dismembered and displayed. Simple, clear, mathematical. The bodies did not lie. The silence that followed did not lie. And the lesson carved into New York's criminal underworld did not fade. By 1960, Bumpy Johnson was in his 60s, still walking his morning route, still running numbers, still the gravitational center around which Harlem organized itself. Younger men rose. Younger crews challenged old hierarchies. The world changed. Civil rights, Vietnam, the slow structural collapse of traditional mob families. But nobody touched Bumpy. Not because they could not. Because they remembered. Because the story had calcified into myth. And myths last longer than the men who create them. In 1968, Bumpy Johnson died of a heart attack in a Harlem restaurant. 62 years old. Surrounded by friends and associates. No violence. No betrayal. Just time catching up the way it always does. His funeral drew thousands. Politicians. Gangsters. Shop owners. Mothers with children. The entire neighborhood turned out. Not under orders, but because they wanted to pay respects to a man who kept the peace through calculated brutality and unshakable principles. Because he had protected his own. Because he had established boundaries and enforced them without apology or hesitation. And because 16 years earlier, he had demonstrated with surgical precision exactly what happened when you violated those boundaries. No prosecutor ever charged him. No jury ever convicted him. No official record connected him to 5 mutilated corpses in Brooklyn. But history does not operate on legal precedent. It operates on memory, on stories told in whispers, on lessons learned in blood. And the memory that survived Bumpy Johnson was not about numbers rackets, or political corruption, or territorial disputes. It was about a man who lost his dog and made absolutely certain the entire world understood that loyalty, respect, and the sanctity of home were non-negotiable values enforced with lethal violence. The police files stayed closed. The cases stayed unsolved. The mystery stayed officially unresolved. But the lesson that stayed open. Forever. Passed down through generations like scripture. History remembers results, not methodology. It remembers the decades of peace that followed, not the violence that established it. It remembers the man who walked Harlem every morning for 23 years, and the 8 minutes he spent annually remembering what he had lost. No convictions, no arrests, no trials, no justice in any legal sense. Just a story that became law. And a law that required zero enforcement because everyone already understood the cost of violation. 5 men learned it the hard way. The rest of New York learned it by watching what was left of them. No verdict was ever read. No names were called before a judge. But Harlem changed. Quietly. Permanently. Because real power does not need courtrooms to validate it. It exists in the way people walk slower past certain addresses, in the way conversations go quiet when certain names are mentioned, in the way invisible boundaries get drawn and nobody dares cross them. In 1952, 5 men thought age had made Bumpy Johnson weak. They were wrong. 5 bodies proved it. And for 16 years after, nobody in New York forgot which message was louder. Some laws do not need to be written. They are carved into bone by those who witnessed the consequences. If you stayed until the end, you understand these stories about consequences. Not glorifying violence, still matter. Subscribe to the channel for more untold stories, and tell me when the system looks away. Is silence survival or complicity?